Please do get your teas and something to eat before you sit down. We don't want any hungry bellies throughout the meeting. So make sure you have something to eat, please. All right. A very good morning to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for attending today. Abigail Marshall Cutting is my name. I'm very delighted to be your new Scrutiny Chair for Infrastructure Investment and Inclusive Growth Scrutiny Board. And to just also say huge welcome to any member who is also new to this board. So there's me and whoever is also new in the same boat. So a very, very warm welcome. This is the first meeting for this municipal year. And I would like to remind attendees that this meeting will be webcast, and there will be a link for people to be able to view the recording later. So for the benefits of the public and people who are watching this meeting this morning, I would like to ask members to kindly introduce themselves, and it will just be members of the board first before the rest of the invited guests to introduce themselves. So I will start with Councillor Hamilton.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Sharon Hamilton, Moortown and Meanwood Ward.
Good morning, Isaac Wilson, Councillor for Wheatwood Ward.
Morning, John Garvani, Councillor for Horsforth Ward.
Morning, Michael Miller, Councillor for Kippax and Methley Ward.
Morning, everyone. Nicole Sharp, Councillor for Temple Newton Ward.
Morning, everybody. Councillor Arif Hassan Gipton and Hercules.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Conrad Hartbrook, substituting for Councillor Sandy Lay, who's unfortunately been called away on an urgent work matter.
Mike Foster, elected member for Ardsley and Robin Hood.
Good morning, Neil Buckley, Old Woodley Councillor.
Good morning, Councillor Paul Alderson, Guiseley and Roden Ward.
Thank you, and a special shout out to Councillor Miller. It's his first scrutiny board, so just give him a wave. That's it. Thank you. Right. Sorry, you're not a councillor. Over to you, Becky. Introduce yourself, please.
I'm Becky Atherton, Principal Scrutiny Advisor to this board.
Morning, Andy Booth, and I'll be the clerk to the board.
Thank you all very much. I would also like to use this opportunity to say a very huge thank you to my predecessor, Councillor, he's now called Paul Trustwell. He's no longer a councillor who's retired after so many years serving the council and specifically serving this board. I believe it's 10 years, about 10 years serving this scrutiny board. And we surely will miss his huge and massive experience on chairing this board. So we just want to use this opportunity and make sure he knows. I do think he's watching somehow. So if you're watching, Paul, we just want to say huge thank you to your years of service, and thank you for everything that you gave this board. Okay, so we're going to start straight away, and I will now pass on to Andy to go through agenda items number 1 to 5.
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Agenda item number 2, there are no items excluded from the public domain today. Agenda item number 3, we don't have any late items. Moving on to agenda item number 4, do any members have any declarations to make? No. Moving on to agenda item number 5, we've got apologies from Councillor Lay, and Councillor Hartbrook is here as substitute today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hartbrook, for substituting. We appreciate it. Okay, so agenda item number 6 is minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 5th of April of 2023. And what we need to do now is to approve as a correct record of the minutes of this meeting that was held. And I'll pass on to Becky to make some comments since I wasn't the chair at the time. Over to you, Becky.
If I can just make members aware of minute 85, it refers to your end of year statement, which you approved at the end of the last municipal year. That's now been published on the committee webpage. The 2022-2023 Scrutiny annual report will be published alongside it once it's been considered by council on the 12th of July. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Becky. Agenda item number 7, terms of reference. Back to you again, Becky.
Terms of reference is one of the regular items of business that comes to each scrutiny board at the start of the municipal year. It sets out the terms of reference applicable to all scrutiny boards on page 13. It includes Article 6 of the Constitution, which outlines the remit and special responsibilities of the board, and Appendix 3, there is a board that sets out the scrutiny board alignment with the delegated functions and executive portfolios. Members are just asked to note that Article 6 is still in the process of being revised to fully reflect the changes agreed at the AGM in May 2023. The main change in arrangements for this particular scrutiny board is that Councillor Jess Lennox is now the executive member for housing and will therefore lead on matters relating to affordable housing and council housing growth. Both functions fall within the delegation of the Director of City Development. Councillor Hayden will retain executive responsibility for the other aspects of this delegation, namely private housing development. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky, and congratulations, Councillor Lennox, and welcome to our board. Okay, agenda item number 8, back to you again, Becky.
Again, this is an annual item of business that comes to all of the scrutiny boards. The council constitution includes provision for all scrutiny boards to permanently co-opt members for either a period of office that doesn't go beyond the next annual general meeting or for the period of a specific scrutiny board. There are no specific legislative requirements for this board to appoint external representatives. Typically, this board is determined not to do so on the basis of the quite wide-ranging remit. Instead, external witnesses have been brought in for specific items of business. It would be my recommendation that the board continues to adopt this approach, bringing experts in as and when you deem appropriate, unless or until you determine that permanent co-option would add particular value to the board. So it's for members of the board to determine how they would like to proceed.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on swiftly. Agenda item number 9, performance report, which is the only main agenda that we've got today. So I hope you all have got everything in front of you, your papers, and you've gone through that. This agenda item, I will be taking each performance indicator in order, and I'll be inviting members to for questions and comments on each before we move on to the next indicator. So I would now ask our executive members to please kindly introduce yourselves.
Good morning, Councillor Helen Hayden, Executive Member for Sustainable Development and Infrastructure.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Deborah Cooper, Executive Board Member for Resources and Community Safety.
Morning, everyone. Councillor Jess Lennox, Executive Board Member for Housing.
Good morning. I'm Councillor Jonathan Pryor, and I'm the Executive Board Member for Economy, Culture and Education.
Thank you very much, exec members. Could I kindly ask Emma Camilla Price to start by setting up the process for performance reporting for this year. So over to you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, everyone. I'm Emma Camillo Price, and I work in the Intelligence and Policy Service, and we handle performance reporting at a corporate level. So just very briefly to set out how we report to scrutiny boards. For all the scrutiny boards, we bring a performance report twice a year, and those usually in the June and January meetings. And at this meeting, we typically bring Q4 year-end information wherever that is available. Now, at the introduction of the Best City Ambition last year, we did reach out and have conversations with the chairs of the scrutiny boards to take a look at the indicators that we bring and do a bit of a refresh and see if there were any amends required. Being mindful that there are new chairs, we are going to reach out and have those discussions again. Also, in light of the fact that we are refreshing the Best City Ambition this year. Now, in terms of actual performance reporting under the Best City Ambition, some members may be aware that in January we included a draft dashboard which included high-level indicators for consideration for reporting under the Best City Ambition. Work has continued within our service as to how we best report, and at present we are looking at a combination of the Social Progress Index.
Sorry, Emma, some members can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, so just to say again, in terms of the Best City Ambition and how we report at a high level there, we are looking at considering the Social Progress Index in conjunction with the Joint Strategic Assessment, which we carry out every 3 years and is due to be completed next year, and specific indicators lifted from other strategies such as health and wellbeing as required. So work is ongoing on that at the minute, and will continue as part of the Best City Ambition refresh this year. So unless there are any questions on that format, I will hand over to colleagues within City Development to cover the actual matters within this performance report.
Thank you. Martin, I believe you would like to make some introductory comments here as well. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Would you like me to just go through the report in summary, if that helps? Yeah, okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So just by way of headlines on the KPIs that you've got in front of you, the first one is with regard to planning applications. And what you see there is a target, which is the government's designation thresholds, where they're the basis upon which it's decided whether an authority should be designated as underperforming. So you see majors at 60% on time and non-majors 70% on time. The Q4 performance for Leeds is some way above that, with majors at 85.3%, minors at 83.7%, and other at 89.9%. And then at the bottom of that page, you have the historical data where I think you see improvements over time, but then in 21-22, a fallback in performance, which was a function of the pandemic and the impact that had on the delivery of the service. And then in 22-23, the recovery, which gets us to the position that you see now. So moving on, in terms of unemployment in Leeds, that shows that for January 22 to December 22 was at 2.5%. That's a significant drop of 3.1%.
Sorry, Martin,
yeah,
just because I'm taking each KPI.
Okay.
So I'll just stop you there and then just ask if members have got any questions or comments on planning, and then we move on to the next one, if that's all right.
Okay,
Thank you very much. Okay. Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I just recently I had cause to have some correspondence with planning, and they sent me a very candid email about the lack of staff and the difficulties they've had to respond in a timely fashion to various queries from the public. And it was such a candid email, as I say, that I did not forward this on to the member of the public who'd complained to me. But I just wonder, are we doing all that we can to improve this service, given this situation?
I think it's fair to say that it is challenging, Councillor Buckley. There's the issue of lack of trained planners in the marketplace and our pay rates in a competitive environment with the private sector, and that is a challenge for us. what we tend to do is recruit at the junior end, but then the problem we have is that at the point that staff members get experienced and qualified, we're exposed to them being attracted by enhanced pay rates in the private sector. And then we also have the challenge in terms of the council's overall budget position and the need for all directorates and services to operate within the budget parameters. And what we're waiting for is the government's agreement to increase planning fees, because they're set nationally, so we can't change them, and to allow us to then use the sums, which would be ring fenced, I think would be the basis of the government's decision, to planning that would allow us to resource planning to a higher level. So there's whilst it's a complicated issue, I think those are the two principal factors that lead to the challenges that we have. But I don't know if Councillor Hayden wants to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Buckley. And it's, if you could forward that email to me, that I'd be most grateful. We are, because of financial situation and significant cuts to the budget, we are under increasing financial difficulty when it comes to recruitment, and the other reasons that Martin has just set out, with a lack of trained planners. Actually, in Leeds, we do extremely well, but we are constantly recruiting and filling places and being innovative in, for example, in planning enforcement, or in some of the background functions. You don't actually need to be a planner, so you can be trained in that. But I have to say that the finances, not being able to pay people the same as they're in the private sector, the constant demand, as Martin said, when we train our own and we grow our own, but then they move on, which is excellent for them, not so excellent for us, and it's just something that we have to keep working on. I am delighted with this set of figures, though, and I'd like to take this opportunity, and answering Councillor Booker's comment, to thank the team. Going from, in 2021, 2022, 77, 75%, and indeed 67% for minor, to 85 and 83% is an incredible achievement. And that just shows the incredible hard work of the entire planning directorate, from the chief officer right the way through the department. There's some incredible hard work gone on there, especially in teams that maybe are not at full capacity. There will be, though, 17%, 16, 14% of cases that are delayed, and that is probably one of the emails that you receive from a member of the public, Councillor Buckley. But to be at that level, especially when the government's target is 60%, and to be at that level, and we're very lucky in Leeds that people want to work for us, that people want to live and work in this city, and other authorities are not as lucky as that. But we are, and that's why we have to make certain decisions. We are really struggling with the finances, especially, well, after 13 years, but especially the last 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Supplementary question?
Just on the subject of paying them, surely in the private sector, as we all know, it's supply and demand. So if if you can't recruit, you pay more. Can't the council simply pay more?
Martin, do you want to come back?
I'll come back. How many of cuts? 2.5 billion over the last
2.5 billion over the last 13 years,
and
taken away from our budget.
80 million last year. Yeah, we can't pay more. No, sorry.
Councillor Hamilton and then Councillor Hatbrook. I'll come back to yourselves.
My question is, well, first of all, I must say, we're doing really well. You know, fantastic to say that we've always had problem with recruiting planners over the years. It's nothing new. But my question is, do we have apprentice? Because Councillor Aidan, you said that obviously we train them and they move on. Are these our apprentices? Are we taking them in from the beginning? And because they normally stay, most apprentice. So I'm just asking, do we have apprentice from the start right through? You know, but and also the other question is regarding residents do contact us with regards to the length of time. Are we sticking to our target of replying to them when they submit their application?
Thank you, Chair. Just to introduce myself, I'm Martin Elliott. I'm head of strategic planning within the planning department. In answer to your question, Councillor Hamilton, we do take apprentices. We've been quite successful at securing those, but the apprentices actually have to want to come to planning to actually work within the service. So there's work that we do to try and make planning more attractive. And we do find that the apprentices we get are very good, and they do often stay within the authority. And in relation to responding to queries about delayed planning applications, we do endeavour to hit the council's targets in terms of replying to members of the public within the appropriate time. Sometimes that might not happen, but hopefully those are isolated incidences.
Thank you very much. Speaking about delays, Martin, have we caught up from the pandemic in terms of applications? The delays that we had previously, do we know if we've caught up now?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We have caught up. We've caught up for two reasons. One is the number of significant householder applications that we saw during the pandemic, where people didn't move, but they decided to make improvements to their own home. Those have now tailed off, and we've coupled that with increase in staff due to specific pandemic funding, which was available to cover us through that period. So we are catching up now. So we'll be in a much better position and hope to maintain these standards.
Excellent. Many thanks. Councillor Hatbrook.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. The first one I wasn't planning on asking, but following on from the reply given to Councillor Buckley is what I thought was quite a reasonable question, saying we can't pay more. I mean, clearly, what we've said in the earlier answer is we're spending an awful lot of money and time training up junior people to a position of competence and ability to deliver their duties. And I'm just curious as to, and I'm sure it is, but it's not been said, so I think it'd be worth getting on record, whether that's how cost-benefit analysis of, I'll say, seniority and capability versus retention. Because at the end of the day, we could, the pot of money that we have to spend on this is the pot of money. And I'm, taking on point, Councillor Hayden's point of we don't have any more money. Well, yeah, but the money that we do have, we have a duty to spend it as best that we can. And I just wanted some information to say that where we are spending money, because if we want to retain talent, any business, any organization has to do that cost benefit analysis as to whether it's cheaper to grow your own and then keep them to a certain point versus letting the market just skim off the good talent that we spent a long time training and investing in, possibly at the point that they're at their most productive. So I'd like to answer on that. And then the other question, which sort of was my original point, was I think the backlog, clearing the backlog has made really good progress. I'm just curious as to, is that down to effort and resources, or is it down to approach and I guess, are we giving different scrutiny or less scrutiny, or waving some things through where, I won't say rubber stamping, but, where it's basically, actually, we know that that's going to be fine. Less fast tracking is probably a better phrase of putting it. Are we kind of, have we streamlined how we operate to focus on the stuff that matters and then green light the stuff which is more simple and more, I want to build a porch on the front of my house. when there's half the street already has them type thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Hartbrook. So just for your awareness, over the last few years, given the council's financial challenges, the service has undertaken some efficiency reviews where we have scrutinised our approach to the administration of planning applications and the way they are managed within the service. The implementation of those efficiency reviews is now underway, including some detailed and specific workforce planning. It's not the time to do that wasn't when the service was at its most stressed and pressed. So now that we are sort of under less pressure, we're carrying out those workforce planning exercises now, so that will go directly to looking at the best ways of doing that. I think the other thing is that it's a balance, because whilst we may have fewer household applications, the complexity of our major applications is ever increasing, with new things like biodiversity net gain, with assessments of net zero, increasing burdens on design with design codes, etc. So it's about balancing all of those things. So when we do get on a better footing, there's other things that maybe do increase the pressure on us, and certainly members of the plans panels certainly very keen to see those sorts of issues brought to the fore in our decision making. But again, what we do encourage is significant pre-application negotiation with developers, so that actually when the application gets submitted, it's right first time, so that we're actually trying to reduce the amount of burden and negotiation at that actual planning application stage. So it's a number of different things coming together.
Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor.
During the pandemic, we did receive some recovery money, which was used to employ staff, to employ particularly on kind of just after university graduates, and many, I think the majority, if not all of them, are still with us and working with us. It is a balance of experience and younger people who are learning from, and you need that experience so that the younger people can learn from the more experienced people in the directorate, and that's the same in any organisation. There's also a balance of, it's not just about money when you work for a local authority. It can't ever just be about money when you work for a local authority, because I think everybody could earn more money in the private sector. So especially when you have a skills and expertise, as our planning officers do. So it's about that retention. It's about making working in planning, as Martin said, as attractive as possible, and that people feel supported and enjoy their work, and feel respected. And that flexibility of working in our workplace now, which is the same for all organisations, either private or public, to consider that flexible working and how people now need and want to run their lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Foster, did you want to say something?
Oh.
Was it Councillor Foster or was it Councillor Hartbrook? You put your hands up, didn't you? Has it been answered?
I haven't asked the question.
Oh, right. You've got supplementary question. Okay.
Councillor Hayden, I'm not sure I quite heard the answer to the question, which, because your challenge back to Councillor Buckley was that, essentially there isn't more money to pay for more, within the overall budget. But I guess my point is, where we have, a particular talent, and I appreciate that people, don't come to work often for particular organisations driven solely by the salary which they take home. There are other work-life balances, working environment, etc., which I would hope as a council we offer a very good one. But your point back to Councillor Buckley was quite unanimous in that we can't pay more. And I just wanted to clarify, do you mean we can't pay more as a departmental budget because the budget is kind of fixed, or do you mean that actually if a particular officer is very, very good and deemed very, very good value, there is nothing that we can, or is it nothing that we will do to return that talent?
I sat on for many years on the resources scrutiny board, and this came up time and time again. We have pay scales, and it was a particular problem in IT, and it will, I'm sure, continue to be a particular problem as they can demand much higher salaries elsewhere. We have pay scales, and you will run into significant problems if you pay one individual much more money and then other people on the same grade as them. I don't think we're allowed to, are we? I'll bring in Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden, and thanks, councillors, for your question on the resources side of this agenda. I have to say that it's extremely challenging for us, Leeds City Council as an organisation, to keep within the budget that we have set because of the financial envelope that we are experiencing and that we have to bring in on budget. Last year, outturn was just recently at Executive Board, and we had to rely on strategic reserves to help us meet the budget because it is so challenging for us. And we have set out various criteria to help us to keep within that budget, and also various efficiencies that each directorate has to make within that year as well, which includes city development, I have to say, in the planning department. And we've got a freeze on non-essential spend. We also have agreed pay scales that we work to, and that's through the National Employers and Association, through the LGA as well. And so we wouldn't be able to just individually change those pay scales through as an individual local authority without undertaking that necessary work through the National Employers Association. There is through the Local Government Association, there is some talk about looking at what those pay scales are, because some of those at the bottom end of the pay scale are kind of squashing together now, given the national minimum wage and so on like that. So there is some work nationally and being undertaken and being looked at through the pay scales. But as an individual authority, we stick to those pay scales. Sometimes somebody may apply for promotion, and that's one way that we are able to offer increased salary and increased responsibility to individuals in the organisation. But it's just not possible for us to change the conditions of people's employment within the same role, apart from the agreed increases through the processes through the National Employers Association. And I'd just remind Scrutiny members that just how challenging the finances have been for this organisation. We've had £2.5 billion removed from our budget over the last 13 years. And at some point, it's got to impact that withdrawal of that amount of financial stability within an organisation has to hit home somewhere. And we are starting to feel that in some service areas. But in terms of recruitment and retention, the HR service are doing all they can in terms of the individual areas where we know we've got some specific concerns. So whether that be through social care, through IDS, through planning, there are a number of areas that HR are working on to see what we can do in those circumstances where we know there's gaps and where we can improve those gaps whilst remaining within our budget, I have to say.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cooper. You happy? Yeah. Okay. Councillor Foster and then Councillor Alderson.
Thank you.
I think on the face of it, the figures look quite good. I bet you didn't think you'd get much of a grilling on item one, to be honest with you. But one question that did suddenly occur to me, we're talking about resourcing recruitment. So very simply, the budgeted headcount for the planning department, can you just tell me what the budgeted number is and what the actual number is?
Yeah, we'd have to come back on that, Chair. We don't have that data here to share, I'm afraid, but we can provide a written note to the board if that helps.
Yes, that would be helpful. Thank you. Sorry about that, Councillor Foster, but we'll ensure we get that information back for you. Councillor Alderson.
Thank you, Chair. While I know the report does say that target percentages are the government's designation thresholds, I just wondered how those percentages equate to actual application numbers based on previous years. Please. Thank you.
I mean, I know that the figures have recently come out for March 23, and Leeds processed 4,500 planning applications. If you looked at us nationally, that would place us as the third busiest planning authority in England. The busiest being Buckinghamshire. I'm not sure why, but it is, and Birmingham, which is marginally above Leeds, but interestingly, not by a great degree, given that Birmingham has a larger population of about 250,000 to Leeds. So in terms of the number of planning applications with the processing, it's about that number, and it tends to be relatively consistent, Martin, I think, doesn't it? Around that number, as you know, we're in the top 1% of busiest planning authorities in England.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you. So that figure would be pretty typical of 2018, 19 and 19 and 20 numbers as well. So that there hasn't been a drop there in applications.
I think the area where, and I'll ask Martin if he can comment on more detail on this, where we got a surge was in the small applications towards the end of 2020-21. Which was probably a pandemic effect of the financial implications of the pandemic were felt in different ways. Some people faced real hardship. Some people actually saved money, and perhaps that then led to applications for small extensions to homes, etc., which came through at quite a number. But Martin, I don't know if you've got any more data on that.
Yeah, I don't have the specific figures on that. I think they've gone down by about sort of 25% the householder applications, but I can get back to you on that if you'd like a written response on that. But that's certainly where we've seen the greatest decrease in terms of numbers. But the major applications, as you can see by the number of cranes in the city centre, etc., are still at that level.
Lovely. That would be great if possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, one more. I'm conscious that we've got 11 indicators to go through, and we're still on number one indicator. So, Councillor Sharp.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a quick comment from me, actually. I feel like I've got slight inside knowledge because it's my 5th year on the North and East Plans panel. And there's a significant amount of work that goes through the panel. We've been through a global pandemic, and with year on year, significant cuts to budget. And I think that the plans team should be commended for getting back to where they are. Thanks, Chair.
Anyone wants to come back? The two Martins?
I'll just receive it, and I'll pass that on to colleagues for their hard work, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, the two Martins on that agenda item, and to the exec members who've supported it. Definitely the stats look good progress, and we'll continue to keep an eye on that and come back. And please do remember, don't forget to come back to us with the responses that we would need to from the questions. So going straight on to number 2, unemployment now. Could I kindly ask the officers who would be dealing with this to introduce themselves so that people who are watching from the public would know who's speaking and what you do. So over to back to you, Martin. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll introduce it, and I think in terms of detail, Eve Roodhouse, who I'll ask to introduce herself now, will add to that alongside the executive member.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Eve Roothouse. I'm Chief Officer for Culture and Economy at the Council.
So in terms of this indicator, looking at unemployment in Leeds, it shows a decrease over the period from 2021 to 2022. It's gone down from 5.6% to 2.5%. So that's a reduction of 3.1 percentage points, which is a significant drop. By way of context, the average unemployment rate across core cities was 4.6%, with both the West Yorkshire and Yorkshire Humber rate at 3.6%, which matches the UK average over the January to December period. So the Leeds reduction is ahead of the core city and West Yorkshire average. And within Leeds, it's the second largest drop in unemployment rate across the core cities, with Liverpool at 3.3% as the only core city that's above us. Newcastle showed a 3 percentage point drop, as did Manchester, Birmingham 2.5%, Glasgow 0.5%. So that's the background to that KPI, Chair.
Thank you very much. Eve, do you want to come in here?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would just add that the data reported runs up to December. And we actually have seen small increases since December, but consistently month on month in terms of the numbers claiming universal credit, noting that those claiming universal credit can also be in employment and unemployment figures. That's in line with the trend across England. So Leeds is not an outlier in that respect. So just to make people aware that that trend is now going slightly upwards.
Thank you very much. I've got a question for you here before I pass you on to members. So in terms of the data that you have sent to ourselves, in terms of the quality of jobs that you are having here and the percentages of what's increased and what's gone down, what kind of jobs are they? What do we have, especially in terms of 0 hours contract, part-time, full-time? What's the quality, highly skilled, low? What is the quality of the employment in the city?
Thank you, Chair. So the data that we rely on for reporting comes primarily from the Department of Work and Pensions, and it doesn't provide us with that level of information. What I would say is that where we see skills shortages tends to be in some of the growth sectors in the city. And what we're working on through the Future Talent Plan, which some Scrutiny members will recall came to Scrutiny last year, is interventions to make sure that we're helping people who are currently unemployed or claiming universal credit to get the skills they need to get into those jobs. But those interventions, which we've been taking since roughly autumn, won't necessarily be feeding through into these figures as yet in terms of supporting people into some of those jobs that exist, including in areas like the digital sector in the city.
Okay, thank you. Councillor, you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, I mean, headline wise, the numbers look really, really, really good. I mean, and we all know that Leeds is a very vibrant, booming city. You've only got to look at the number of cranes across our skyline to see that we are growing, and we're growing well. I'm just within the numbers here. What I don't see is the story, because there's a lot of things. For example, I know after the COVID pandemic, that there's a cohort of people in there sort of between 50 and 60 who've just become economically inactive, who that kind of thing would cause a drop in what is labelled unemployment, but actually it's just not looking for employment. So I just want to know what as a city, when these numbers are quite different to other core cities, I guess what's the story?
So there is more detailed information below this, which is circulated on a regular basis. And I think probably just some highlights to underline in terms of understanding a bit more. We do see in the figures that there are proportionately more women than men claiming universal credit or unemployed, which reflects the fact that in Leeds, women on average are paid £10,000 less than men. The average wage is 23k versus 33k. So that's one of the sort of things that we see. We're actually working with the Centre for Local Economic Studies at the moment about that, to look at the interventions that could be made to support women to become more productive in the Leeds economy. But we also see on that point about inactivity that there are percentage-wise more people with mental and behavioural disorders that are claiming employment support allowance than those with physical, which points to the fact there may be kind of challenges to access services, but that's probably a supposition rather than an evidence point around those services needing to support people into work. We do a lot of proactive work through employment and skills to support people that have challenges to get into the workplace. A good example of that is actually an event that's happening tomorrow at the Arena, the Send Next Choices event, which is supporting young people who have kind of either physical or mental kind of needs at school to kind of see what jobs that are available for them in the economy. You know, neurodiverse people have great skill sets that are really useful for some employers, for example. So tomorrow we'll be showcasing some of that and helping people find the right pathways into work through some of that activity. I'm hoping that answers the question.
Councillor Hatbrook?
Not sure it does. Maybe I just didn't understand it. So within these figures, is it people who would otherwise be claiming benefits, universal credit, that have entered the employment market, or are there other factors such as, you know, people becoming economically inactive or moving on to, for example, you know, sickness benefit, which is measured differently? I just to get the metric, you know, is this a really good news story as it looks, of more people in Leeds having jobs who compared with other cities, which is a great story? Or is this, I just want to rule out that there isn't something that is quirky in terms of, yeah, that's driving it. I can see Jonathan nodding.
In itself, I would say it is a positive story that there are more people in employment. I think what the data doesn't show is there are other elements of the employment market which just aren't answered by this, which may be positive, maybe negative, in terms of whether those people in employment are also, you know, have they moved from universal credit? There are going to be a number of people who are down as employed who will also be claiming universal credit. I think it's 41% of UC claimants are in some form of work. And I think that really demonstrates that even when people are in work, there's going to be a level of underemployment where people just aren't being paid enough, or don't have, as Councillor Marshall talked about, 0-hour contracts. They're not receiving enough hours. So this statistic in itself, yes, is a positive, but are there other factors that need improvement, need work on? Yes, absolutely. And it's difficult to kind of look at everything all in one go in one graph. There are so many different angles, as Eva was talking about, kind of some of those differentials between gender. Some of that isn't kind of captured in the top line, but is still an issue underneath. So in terms of a narrative, it's, yes, this is positive, but it's not the entire picture of employment in the city.
Okay, thank you, even Councillor Pryor. Good. Councillor Gavani.
Thank you, Chair. Again, as Councillor Hartbrook said, as a headline figure, this is absolutely brilliant across Leeds. Are there hotspots that haven't seen that decrease? And are they in areas that we can do some work on?
Yeah, so we do get the breakdown numbers by ward. And that's in the report that was circulated regularly to members. So you can take a look at that in more detail, but hotspots do include Gipton and Hare Hills, Bermontoft, Richmond Hill, Armley, Beeston and Holbeck, Hunslet and Riverside, Killingbeck and Seacroft, Middleton Park. So we tend to focus our employment and skills efforts on particular communities. We do know the postcodes where we've got those priorities, and we locate our employment and skills staff in particular neighbourhoods to support that activity, working alongside the Department of Work and Pensions and others.
Thank you very much. I do know the future plan is due to come back to this board in September, so we can ask for further information and talk about it more in September. Councillor Pryor, did you want to come back?
it was just very briefly to say when you look at these things on a heat map of where the issues are, it looks exactly the same as every other heat map we have for every issue in the council, whether that be housing, antisocial behaviour, or health inequalities, and it just shows exactly where we need to be focusing on pretty much everything as a council. There aren't any surprises in there.
Thank you, Councillor Hartbrook. You said tinny when you make sure it's that.
Tiny. Just one point to make. Heat maps are very, very useful at a macro level. I'm always very, very wary of them because the granularity they often offer. So for example, I know in my own ward, there are some pockets of like quite profound deprivation. But if you take about the average of a ward, we're not. So I think that's the same. It's one of the things that I think is actually a strength of Leeds, in that we don't have many areas which are truly deprived or truly utterly opulent. There, within every ward there is a mixed picture. So I'm just keen that as a council we don't lose sight of the need of, because actually sometimes being poor in an affluent ward is harder than being poor in a poor ward, because if you don't get the resources.
Just to reassure that the data we get from the DWP does go deeper than ward level. We just present it as a ward level because that's how we operate, but we do work deeper than that.
Thank you. Even Councillor Pryor, are we able for January 2024 data, are we able to get the employment data per ward so that people can clearly see? Because obviously when we're talking about the discrimination and also talking about deprivation, we can see where people are falling in terms of the different 33 wards in the city. For example, as a city centre councillor, I get residents coming to me and saying, we're seeing lots of work and lots of buildings and all of that going on in the city, and we haven't got jobs. Who are the people coming to take these jobs? Are they local? Are they from outside? What's the percentage? So not for now. So I'm talking about January 2024. And Eve, I do remember on the 8th of June when we had our introductory briefing with yourself, you were saying something about a data scientist. Remember you have something to do with the open innovations. Can you just give us a quick talk about that, please? Thank you.
Yes, of course. So we have a partnership with Open Innovations, who are an organisation that work in data in the city. They're well established. They've been going for 10 years, whereby we're part funding a PhD who is then working with our economic policy team. We're hoping to recruit somebody on an apprenticeship using the apprenticeship levy to build up data science skills and have an exchange of knowledge and practice, so that we can look at data in new and different ways. There is a sort of a challenge in relation to the question about knowing who's getting particular jobs. It's very difficult to get that information unless employers are going to give you data about the postcodes of their staff in terms of their travel to work area. So I think I don't think it would be possible for us to be able to achieve that picture for the city. Although I will ask the question of the team about whether there's something we can do, and it may be there's something we can do with our anchors networks to give an indication of employment by postcode, because we have an employment group through the anchor network. So we might be able to get some indicative information, but that won't necessarily tell you about some of the new companies coming in different sectors.
Okay, thank you. But just do try, okay? Thank you very much. Right. Moving on to number 3, number of new business startups, and that's on page 9. Councillor Hussain, I do apologise.
Thank you, Chair. Just quick one things, living crisis. I can understand that my ward is already struggling with the young people to gain the jobs or even to the scales and everything. I'll be honest with you, Rival, the number of the people who are represented in my ward, they have a small businesses, and the small businesses, be honest with you, Chair, they are struggling. It's not just only in my ward, I'm sure right across the city, right? And we do need to think about how many people they are employing by the small businesses. And if it's going like that, we needed to make the plans how we can even help to them or the people who are working with small businesses. And that will be a big challenge to me for the next 6 months if it's living crisis are staying as it is?
So thank you for the question. So the council obviously provides business support services, which are primarily historically funded through European money and now primarily funded through the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. And a number of those we deliver on behalf of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority for the region. They are prioritised in particular areas. So, for example, the Adventure Programme, which supports businesses that are 3 years or less, Digital Enterprise, which supports businesses to adopt new technologies for them to be able to achieve greater productivity and to be able to support their continued success and growth. So, for example, investing in website marketing and so on to support the business. We don't have money that can just be given in support grants in the way that we did during COVID-19. So during COVID-19, we obviously had significant money that came through the government that was awarded with some discretion locally out to businesses to be able to support them through that period. That type of grant scheme was a temporary grant scheme and not something that we currently offer as a council because we don't have the resources to do schemes of that nature.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Arif has actually carried us nicely into business startups. Yeah, I'll come to that because we're the number 3, 4, and 5. If we could, members, if you could look at the data together and then we can ask and make comments on the same question. So that would be for number of business startups, number of business scale-ups, as well as the business survival rate. And then we can deal with the 3 together, if that's okay. So did you want to come in first? Thank you, Councillor Cooper, Pryor.
Sorry, it was just to add very briefly onto the support Eve was talking about in terms of for businesses. I think it's important Scrutiny know the difference in support available. So previously through the EU, we were funded on something called the European Structural Investment Fund that had a value of £350 million. That's been replaced with UK SBF, the value of which is £68 million. So that even though it's the government have said this is a fund we're using to replace an EU fund, it is 81% less. And I think that is important just for the board to know how much less support the government are providing to the city.
Thank you. Okay, so for business startups, who's Martin? Is that you again?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Do
Thank
you want me
you.
to go through these 3 all together?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay,
Thank you.
So starting with business startups, this indicator reports business startups using figures from Bank Search, and that takes information from companies' house and high street bank accounts and open data. The new business startups for April 21 to March 22 was 4,654. And for the period April 22 to March 23, that increased to 4,950. So that's an increase of 296. There were 1,294 startups registered in Q4 in Leeds, which is up from 1,214 over the Q4 for the previous year. And what that means for the year April 22 to March 23 was that there was 4,950 startups in Leeds, up from the same period by 296, and that's an increase of 6.3%. Turning to number of business scale-ups, and business scale-ups is defined as companies that for 3 years of 20% growth in either turnover or employment. The figure for 2021 is 470. That's a change of 135, down from 605 in 2020. The annual business scale-ups previous measure that we use is no longer available, and instead we now use information provided directly from the ONS on their interdepartmental business register, which is available on each calendar year. And then finally, on business survival rate, the survival rate for 2021 for Leeds is 37.6%. That's a reduction of 3.2% against the figure for 2020, which stood at 40.8%. So what this indicator is doing is look at the annual indicator for the number of new businesses still trading after a 5-year period. And again, the information is reported by the ONS. That 37.6% compares to the UK average of 38%, so it's marginally lower. When you look at this thing compared to core cities, the drop in Leeds of 3.2% was a smaller drop than was experienced in Manchester of 7.4% and Birmingham 3.6%, which I think is interesting in the context of the larger commercial centres of the core cities. I'd compare Leeds more directly to Birmingham and Manchester. That said, the figure in Leeds, the fall was greater than a number of the other core cities, including Belfast, Nottingham and Newcastle, which meant that Leeds ranked 7th of the core cities overall. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Martin. Okay, I did have some members wanting to speak. So Councillor Isaac, do you want to go first, and then Councillor Neil Buckley?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. On the business scale-ups stat, this is really just looking ahead to December on our work schedule. We've got looking at business support down, which is something that I asked for in last year's municipal year. I think for that, it would be really useful for us to know which businesses are, what types of businesses are scaling up and which aren't. The number of business scale-ups is obviously, yeah, just a gross number, but what is that as a kind of, what's the potential for business scale-ups is something I'm interested in. So yeah, are there 5,000 businesses that could have scaled up and several hundred did, or is that quite a high, you know, how's that looking? So I think the kind of percentage of businesses that are scaling up that could scale up is useful, and where they are and what type of businesses they are they retail, are they manufacturing, that kind of thing. And from there, we can understand their needs. I mean, I'm saying all of this bearing in mind Councillor Pryor's comments earlier about how much support we could possibly give people given the funding situation. And maybe it's not all on the council in a way, maybe there's people we can lobby or other things we can do, but I would be really interested in having a much more in-depth discussion about the factors that affect business scale-ups in particular in our December work schedule. Thanks.
So that's really helpful to note the focus, and we'll definitely look at that. One of our challenges is that, which is a known challenge, is that the SIC codes, the codes that are used at Companies House to define businesses, are woefully out of date. So it means it's, even if you look at SIC codes, you can't necessarily tell the nature of what the business is. So we have in the past done bits of work with an organisation called the Data City, who take a completely different approach and help you kind of look at data through different sources, through scraping the web and other ways to be able to see those areas. So I'll look into our ability to be able to do some work with them before December, so we can use that to give you kind of a bit of a picture on that as scrutiny. And then I think it will probably be also useful in December if some evidence is brought by the combined authority as well as my team, because the combined authority play a really significant role in business support and run a number of business support programmes that are operated at the regional level. So I think that would probably be useful, Chair, if they also joined me and my team in December to report to you.
Sure, thank you. Yes, Councillor.
Thanks, it's really useful context. And just a quick follow-up question is there much kind of qualitative evidence available? Are there surveys of SMEs in Leeds or whatever that we could draw on just to get a sense from what the businesses think are the factors affecting their ability to scale up or not?
So the Chamber do a really helpful quarterly economic survey, which gives us some indicators about a bit of a barometer for how businesses are feeling. It's of their members, but it's very useful because it gives you kind of a sense of business confidence and the areas they're concerned about, for example, flagging issues around trade and so on. And it's always been very useful. So I'm happy to send a note to make sure that scrutiny committee members know where to find that information, and can be alerted when those publications come out on a quarterly basis. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. On business startups, I realise that some wards are almost entirely residential and therefore will not have many businesses within them. Mine's a classic example of that. But I was interested that Gipton and Harehills, which we heard about, was down as an unemployment black spot, if you like. But on the other hand, it has the most startups in all the wards. And I just wondered, what kind of startups typically are these?
So, Chair, this is something that Councillor Trustwell had an eye on, the previous chair of the committee, and we did take a look at this a number of years ago with the university, because this has been something where Gipton and Harehills have stood out. And that research suggested some hot spotting in relation to where accountancies, registered offices had set up, and or where an accountant was working from home. So you would get a high number of businesses potentially using the office address of an accountancy as their registered business address. So that is why that area is an outlier. But it's also likely that in a high area of unemployment, you may have more people choosing a route of self-employment. So I would suspect it's a combination of those things, Councillor.
Thank you. Happy, Councillor Buckley? Good. Okay. Any other comments? Fantastic. Okay, Councillor Hatbrick.
Yeah, I guess a couple of quick things. I was surprised at the threshold for scale up is 20%, because that's quite meteoric by most business growth stats. Now, I imagine there's a lot of businesses which are growing quite well, or indeed suffering, because we are entering a phase of increased rents, increased energy, increased everything, which isn't shown in these stats yet, I don't think. So it's just a comment on the 20% seems quite high. I guess the other point is that just because you live in an area of high residential rather than classical businesses doesn't necessarily mean you don't have many registered businesses, because many professional services work, people work from home and work remotely. So I know in my ward there are a lot of businesses that are registered from domestic properties. There's a shortage of office space, but that's another issue.
Thank you. I take it that's a comment, or is that a question? That's a comment. All right. Thank you very much. Okay. Can I ask Eve, in terms of post-Brexit, what would you say has been the impact in terms of businesses in the city? Have we seen any significant impact?
So I think the main, sometimes it's difficult to extract some of the implications of the war in Ukraine from leaving the EU. But I think the main things that are specific to leaving the EU is a reported challenge in trading, and the levels of kind of process and checks that need to be followed, which can then create extended lead times on supply chains. So there's a particular impact on manufacturing reported by the Manufacturing Alliance in terms of that. And anecdotally, if you speak to businesses, a lot of businesses are putting off increasing international trade just at the moment because they perceive the barriers to be quite high in terms of the effort required to undertake that trade. So I think we could look at the data a bit more and bring that back. Happy to, but that's kind of more of an anecdotal response to the question, Chair.
Additionally, a large sector that's again anecdotal that's been reported to me a lot is around the cultural sector and performers, which has limited the number of performers who will come to the UK due to the additional admin that needs to be done, but actually has also reduced the opportunities of Leeds residents to tour and go abroad more. So even though that wouldn't necessarily appear in our reports because they'd be working outside of Leeds, it's still about the opportunities of those Leeds residents, and those have been fewer since.
And Councillor Price speaking has just reminded me that certainly from a financial and professional services point of view, there's a feeling that there's an opportunity to capitalise on leaving the EU in terms of regulation in the UK. that hasn't yet been kind of harnessed and picked up. So there's also some areas where opportunities are being seen, but the work to kind of maybe take advantage of those opportunities hasn't yet come through, perhaps because a lot of time had to be spent in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hatbrook.
Again, more of a comment. My background is in manufacturing for many years, and I think the big effect on Brexit is a slow effect, because if you are choosing where to build a new facility or a new factory, are you going to put it in a location where 80% of your client base are, or where 20% are? And it's much easier. Many businesses that are looking, particularly big multinationals that are looking to locate new offices or new manufacturing sites, which are multi-million pound installations, are saying, well, actually, we could put it in the UK, but then we've got to export 80%, or we could site it within the EU, where we're only exporting 20%. And that because given the timescales over which businesses do these investments, which is a decades-long plan, it's, unless as a country and frankly as a city we do something about it, it's going to be a slow bleed out.
Sorry, I didn't really want to get into a Brexit debate today, but can I just say how fantastic it is that we're almost at zero unemployment in this city?
Thank you very much. Okay, just one more question, Eve, in terms of the trends for the different sectors in the city that are thriving, and obviously those who are currently experiencing, the economic downturn that we currently have, what would you say is still showing? Is digital, financial, what is it?
So again, please forgive me, this is more anecdotal, and I'm happy to follow up with the committee on hard data to help. But indicatively, I'd say there are significant challenges. We understand them obviously in hospitality and leisure, in the sense of increasing costs, significant debt taken on during COVID-19, which businesses didn't plan for, which they're having to service. And also, obviously, I think in the next few months, we're likely to see coming through the implications of the mortgage rates going up, and therefore people having less money to spend. So I think that hospitality and leisure are quite vulnerable for those businesses that, may be in a position where they have significant debt they're servicing. We are still in Leeds very successful across a range of economies, which actually should help those other sectors as well, because of those being strong. And that's the advantage of us having a broad-based economy and why we recovered well from the last recession. So the digital sector is still buoyant, although we are seeing a reduction in the numbers of vacancies that they are advertising. So it's not a complete, the boom in that sector during COVID is slowing a little, but still very buoyant. And there are a number of digital companies still choosing Leeds as a location to locate their businesses. Not least recently, Cognizant, the global US company, recruiting really quickly in the city, and PEXA, an Australian company who's chosen Leeds to locate, who are a major disruptor in the mortgage market process to speed that up, to speed that up. So they're a sort of fintech company, financial technology. And professional services are still strong as well. Manufacturing in the city, despite the challenges, there is a lot of optimism in the manufacturing sector in the city. I think that goes partly to the culture, I think, of our businesses in the city around what they, belief in their own businesses and their strength and what they do, and adaptability. But that's my feeling from the Manufacturing Alliance and attending events with them and Make UK in the city. But again, Chair, we can happily, in some of our reports coming through over the year, we can certainly give a bit more information about different sectors.
Okay, thank you very much. I also note that the data that we have received is for 2021, which I would say is relatively quite old. So are we looking for, do we know when we're going to have an updated report on other indicators? Have you got that? that will illustrate the current trends that we currently are having?
Chair, certainly for the number of business scale-ups, the 2022 figures are anticipated in February 2024. So it is acknowledged they're quite out of date, and there's a certain lag due to delays in businesses submitting final accounts for inclusion. The direct data is direct from ONS, so we'll get it when it's released. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions on that? Okay, thank you. Right, we would now move on to number 6, growth in new homes, and that's on page 24, members of your pack. And Martin again.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So with regard to growth in new homes in Leeds, the target, which is derived from our adopted core strategy, is 3,247 homes per annum. If we look at the graph that's presented on page 43, you'll see a gradual growth in the number of homes delivery over the last 9-10 year period, and that in the last few years we have delivered overall against that core strategy target. I think for the period April to December 22, so we're reporting 3 quarters here, the delivery is 2,073. So whilst we're not reporting on the 4th quarter at this point in time, I think the expectation is that we will fall short of that 3,247 for this year. And I think taking a step back, people might say that's quite surprising given the amount of cranes that are on the horizon. And as the report outlines in front of you, there are over 100 sites under construction in the city. I think my analysis would be that a large part of our delivery currently is on city centre apartment style developments, which rather than volume traditional house building isn't delivered in individual homes, it's delivered on block, where, for example, the Guinness Partnership are currently constructing 1,000 units. Latitude Purple are delivering 655. So you've got about 350 on site at Quarry Hill. So that gives quite a lumpy delivery profile. And I think what we're seeing here in terms of this year, and particularly Q1 for this reporting period, where there was only 535 delivered, is probably a hangover from the pandemic in terms of those big schemes delaying a start. And that means that they've shunted forward into next year in terms of their delivery. And I would expect that next year we will have a very strong year in terms of delivery, which takes account of that lag factor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Martin. Comments or questions, Councillor Hatbrook?
I guess just picking on that, because like you said, this is homes delivered, isn't it? But as you say, it's, we'll call it a sausage machine, but there's a pipeline of homes in. I was wondering whether it might be useful to, although there'll be a degree of imprecision with it, to map that out as to homes that are already, not in conceptual level, i.e., it's been proposed, but actually where, ground has been broken and they are on the route to being delivered, whether that's mapped out as a dotted line to say, here's where we're heading to.
Thanks, Martin. So the report, I think, says that there's 24,000 odd homes that are available in the short term. So that's made up of around 15,000 homes with planning permission and 7,000 homes that are actually under construction. So it's those 7,000 homes under construction, which is, as Martin said, some of that's quite blocky, that we're expecting to see coming forward over the next 3 years. But with those 15,000 homes that have got planning permission coming swiftly after that. And then back there's about 1,500 homes with outline planning permission, which will then get translated into sort of more formal planning permission. So the pipeline is looking quite healthy.
Yes, Martin. And Martin, sorry, before you come in as well, do we have the update for Q4? If you can just provide.
Well, I think our initial outturn would be 2,704, but that's not audited yet. But that's probably where we're going to end up. So we'll be short by about 500. Yeah. So I was just going to say that in terms of the process that was asked in the question is exactly what we do, and particularly with regard to these large developments, and very much we track, are they going to come in a particular year, or are they going to slip over into the next year? Because that's a major determinant on these figures in terms of how many you deliver in a year. So, you know, as I said, the likes of the Guinness Partnership, Evans Halshaw, which is in the latter stages of development, will deliver 1,000 units. Latitude Purple delivered their topping out ceremony in May, so we'd expect that to deliver in this year at 655 units. So we're looking at those scales of development to see which year they would fit in, and that therefore, whilst we don't know exactly when it will complete, it tends to inform our projection.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Martin, can I ask, in terms of our delivery for new homes, how do we compare with other authorities nationally?
So nationally, we historically in the last few years have been in the top 1% of delivery, the top 3. If you went back 3 or 4 years, the top delivering authority was Tower Hamlets. What you've seen, and Birmingham was strong. What you've seen recently is Birmingham remains strong, although Leeds does very well in comparison to that, but also Manchester and Salford with a very high level of delivery. So Leeds tends to be 3rd, 4th, or 5th in terms of national delivery of new homes of all planning authorities in England.
Thank you very much. Members, you all happy? Yeah, good. Okay. Right. Let's go on to the number of affordable homes delivered. That's on page 43. So we also note that the Leeds Affordable Housing Growth Partnership Action Plans and Leeds local plan for 2040 are due to come back to the board later in the municipal year. So just for members to note that. So Martin, is there anything you would like to come back on that item, please?
Well, just in terms of current delivery, so what we're showing here is the period April to December 2022. So we've got 3 quarters of the year. So over that period, 408 affordable homes delivered, which contrasts with 331 in the same period for 2021. So that's an increase of 77. And that 408 homes delivered for 3 quarters compares to the in-year annual target of 434. But then set against that, we have the backlog of 796, which represents the assessed need in the city. So whilst we may be delivering well against the in-year target, we are some way behind the in-year need that we need to be hitting. Again, in the graph that you see on page 45, it shows the general upward trend in delivery. And I think that reflects a number of factors. One is the good work we've done in terms of Brownfield Housing Fund and bringing schemes forward, utilising that money that we get from the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. We've brought forward proposals of utilising our own land, and that led to the start on Railway Street last month of 54 new homes, which will be 100% social rent, utilising our land. And then the strategic partnerships that we've fostered in terms of our relationship with Homes England and then developers. So the Guinness Partnership that I referred to earlier, whilst our planning policy on affordable homes in the city centre is 7%, they're delivering about 33% because they've accessed strategic housing grant at a national level from Homes England. And hopefully what we're expecting to follow on from that is Clarion with a similar scale of development and a similar percentage of affordable housing using the same route on Kirkswell Road. And alongside that, that's been supplemented by our own Council House Growth Programme, which is added to the figure. So whilst historically we've tended to deliver at about the 400, 450 figure, we're moving now well into the 500 plus figure with the expectation that with the likes of the Guinness Partnership completing, that we could hit 700 affordable homes per annum in the near future. Thank you, Chair.
That's very good. In reference to Brownfield that you have just mentioned, are we anticipating the same level of delivery for the future as well?
On affordable housing, yeah, our affordable housing is predominantly brownfield in nature, and that continues. So we've just brought forward the Copperfields College site as a brownfield site in council ownership, seeking an enhanced level of affordable housing. And we've also recently marketed our Meadow Lane site in the city centre, again looking for an enhanced level of affordable housing as a reuse of what was former highway land, as a good use of brownfield land. And both of those are trying to deliver additional affordable housing, as is Railway Street, in and around the city centre as a key area of activity.
Thank you very much. In terms of our right to buy scheme, I believe I did ask that question at the briefing that I had with yourself. Do we have any data on that one in terms of the impact and of houses that we're buying back as a council?
Yeah, so in terms of, this is right of first refusal. We during the Q3 of 22-23, we had a right of first refusal of 7 new properties that were bought back. And then for the Q4 of 22-23, we had a right of first refusal for a further 9 properties. So that's 100, and sorry, just then over the period of 3 years from April 2020 to March 2023, there were 123 rights of first refusal buybacks that were exercised.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions from members? Councillor Foster.
Thank you. Just touching on the backlog figure, 796 per annum. So it's not just needed for this year, that's per annum. How many homes would you need to provide, affordable homes, to turn that figure to 0?
Well, it would be the 796 plus the 434, that's the in-year target.
I am confused on that then, because I asked a similar question, probably in a different manner this time last year, and I was told that that backlog figure was needed for 10 years.
Would you want to?
I think we can get back to you on that, Councillor Foster, but I think the figures are equalised throughout the plan period for the core strategy. But I think what's also important to understand about the 796 is that was a point in time backlog figure from the last housing market assessment. And the council's currently engaged in new evidence in terms of looking at whether there's unmet needs within the city as it stands now. So there will be a new historic under provision figure that will be available as part of Leeds Local Plan 2040. But I can clarify the point about whether it's a 10-year remedy or a 15-one.
Please, if you would, because I did clarify at the time and stated was that actually 8,000 homes, and I was told it was.
Okay, thank you for that. Residential developments built to require accessible and adaptable standards. Should we have an ambition for a greater number of accessible new properties? Martin?
Thanks, Chair. I can pick this one up. So in the core strategy selective review in 2019, the council introduced a new policy around access to housing in line with the requirements set out in government building regulations for houses to be accessible to those in a wheelchair, and whether those homes should be wheelchair accessible or fully sort of wheelchair kitted out for people who are in a wheelchair, and various standards have been set. It's taken a couple of years to actually see the completions of these houses come through the system, but we're actually seeing a really positive result in terms of meeting that target. I should also say that this will be a factor within the Leeds Local Plan 2040, and because the target's been well met, and actually some developers are actually going 100% meeting these affordable homes, the council can consider whether to actually extend that target now through its next plan review.
Excellent. Thank you, Martin. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Moving on to number 9, progress 8 score for Leeds at the end of key stage 4. So that's on page 47. And like Becky said, we haven't got any of the officers available, but Councillor Pryor is able to help us out today. So over to you, Councillor Pryor.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to talk through this. So for those who aren't aware of the different ways we measure children's progress at school, Progress 8 scores look at the progress children have made from the end of Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 4. So that's end of primary school to the end of secondary school. It differs slightly from attainment. So attainment looks at kind of the raw figures of what grades children have achieved. What Progress 8 looks at is their expected level of development. So if you have a positive Progress 8 score, children have made a greater than expected level of development. If you have a negative Progress 8 score, you have less than an expected level of development, and 0 would mean you have kind of followed on track. All of the scores are relative to the children in that year's cohort, so it's difficult to compare it year on year, but you can compare whether you are consistently doing better or worse. Leeds is doing incredibly well on Progress 8. We are, as the report states, 33rd out of all local authorities. That puts us in the top quartile. What that means is our schools are doing a phenomenal job of achieving better than expected results for our children and young people over the course of their secondary school careers. Hopefully this will lead to them being better prepared for future careers in the city and their future lives. I'll leave it there for introductory comments, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pryor. Members? Come on, wake up. There's still food. Yes, Councillor Hatbrook.
Thanks for that introduction, Councillor Pryor. And obviously wanting to get to the food as well. I was a school governor at Brigshaw for many years, and one of the statistics that always used to haunt me, and it's the same across the UK, is the difference in attainment and achievement, which obviously feeds into Progress 8, between disadvantaged looked after kids and non-disadvantaged looked after kids. And I'd be curious as to, obviously it's not covered in these numbers, but I'm sure you're very aware of the statistic, how as a city we're performing, because obviously schools budgets has been cut, and over the last decade or two, and funding is tight. So I'd be curious, as a city, are we doing everything that we can for the most disadvantaged?
Yes, so a lot of the figures that go into a deeper dive of this obviously go to the children's scrutiny as well, and we do have those figures specifically around progress for children with additional needs. We keep the figures for children looked after as well, so that there are a whole different number of metrics. You're absolutely right, it is a real challenge at the moment to provide kind of the right level of education that children with SEND need. The way a lot of schools are funded, it's a mixture of the schools block funding, which funds most schooling, and then the high needs block, which provides money for children with additional needs. At the moment, there's a cap on gains. So as Leeds is increasing in population, the government recognises that we need more funding, but from the cap on gains refuses to give it to us. This affects a number of local authorities around the country. I think it affects around a quarter of local authorities around the country. It means that the government recognises we need about £20 million more a year to provide a decent education for children with SEND, and then doesn't give it to us. It's something I've raised with I think all of the collection of Secretary of States for Education we've had over the past few years. Some of them reply to my letters saying no, some of them don't even reply to the letter. But the full information on where we are with kind of progress and attainment for children with additional needs does go to the other scrutiny board, but I'm happy to provide that when we come to the full report.
Thank you very much. You're happy, Councillor Hatbrook. Okay. In terms of obviously looking at the SEND as well, it would be good if we actually have got the reports, particularly for that, and also children with English as an additional or a second language. So that will really, really help us. I know you don't have that now, but I'm hoping that you could provide that to us at some point.
Yeah, just to reassure that that's captured as well, and I'm happy to ensure that the annual standards report it can be circulated to all members here.
Thank you very much. And what would you say has been the impact of children who were not able to be in school during the COVID pandemic in terms of your progress aid? That would be helpful if you could just shed some light to that, please.
It's hard to say. So progress 8 wasn't measured for 2 years during the pandemic. It wasn't. There was data collected, but it's not been presented in the same way because they were teacher assessed grades. It wasn't right to compare schools in the same way that they usually are, because there'd be so many discrepancies. I think the greatest impact of the pandemic, and I've seen this when I've gone around a lot of schools, has been the increase in need from a lot of pupils. Those children who had perhaps low level needs where they perhaps didn't need an EHCP probably now need one. Those children who had a medium level of needs, those needs are even greater. It's almost as if a lot of children have kind of moved up a stage. When we've spoken to a lot of primary schools, when their new reception cohorts have actually spent the majority of their life in some level of restriction, there are issues with personal development. And there's huge difference child to child. If a child has had siblings, they've had a wildly different experience of lockdowns to if the child's been an only child. If their parent has been working on the front line and going out, again, those child's experiences have been wildly different. But we are seeing a lot of children coming through who are behind where you would expect them on their level of development. I genuinely don't think we're going to see the full impact of COVID on young children and young people for decades to come. I don't think it's something that will just finish. I think universities and others will be studying the impact of this for a long time to come. It remains to be seen what happens when those cohorts reach the jobs market in 15, 20 years' time. I don't have all the answers on it, but I know that we're still struggling with getting on top of that. One area, and sorry, I'm aware we're creeping into another scrutiny board's remit, but one area where we are really struggling, and actually every local authority in the country is struggling at the moment, is in getting through EHCPs. I'm sure all of you have had casework around that, just from the sheer volume of and the increase in pupils requesting them. In Leeds, we do things slightly differently. We release an amount of funding to ensure that schools can be funded to provide additional support for children with additional needs before they get an EHCP. In a lot of local authorities, that unlocking of funds only is achieved once people have that plan in place. We ensure that some funding is available prior to that. Because every child is different, there is not, it's, you know, if two childs have additional needs, they are going to be different. You know, you have to make sure that there is that bespoke support. So we do ensure that that funding is unlocked sooner. But I'm also aware that there's a lot more work we have to do, and it's something we are working quite hard to get on top of.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Councillor Pryor. On that backdrop, I did mention a bit of it in our pre-mate to all members, and I did speak with Shaheen in my brief with herself, trying to get round our agenda, and I would wish to seek a formal agreement from yourself for us to formally recommend to the children board. So obviously this is in their remit and not ours, but obviously we're also interested in that, to recommend that the children and families scrutiny board consider the progress 8 on the SEND cohort, and hopefully if one or two of us from this board can actually attend that particular meeting. Is that something that I can get an agreement from all of yourselves today? Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you, Councillor Pryor, for intervening on that for us today. Okay. I really do not want to keep us very long. It's Eid today, and we have some members celebrating Eid amongst us. So don't worry, councillors. I'm going to do as much as possible to make sure we finish. So Eid Mubarak to all of you who are celebrating today. Right, straight to number 10, the number of people killed or seriously injured in road traffic collisions. And that's page 48. Councillor Wilson, did you want to come in here? You can come in. You're a member. Go on.
I didn't know whether you wanted to do an overview first, but and then come in after that. Sorry, I was going to ask a question about this
question
KPI,
before this.
but I was going to let them do the overview and then come in. Sorry.
That's fine.
If I just provide a brief overview, Chair. So this is the number of people who are killed or seriously injured in road traffic collisions in Leeds. The indicator for the whole population is 122 people between January 23 and March 23. That compares to 133 for the same period in 2022, so a reduction of 11. And then looking at children and young people, there was a reduction of 1 in the period from 16 in 23 January to March, as opposed to 17 in January to March 22. And that is set against a backdrop of an average of 106 people in that same quarter over the period of 2015 to 2019. So that the graphs that you see on page 50 tend to show a stubborn resilience to those figures over the long term, going back to 2004, a drop during the pandemic as a consequence of a reduction in road traffic activity, but then a concerning increase that you see post-pandemic. And in terms of then, just by way of introduction, one of the main approaches that we have to try and tackle this is through the Vision Zero strategy, which the council formally adopted in September 2022, alongside a wider West Yorkshire initiative, which is chaired by the Deputy Mayor. And in the report, it covers a series of actions that we're currently pursuing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, members, just to note that we actually have the Vision Zero down as an agenda item for our September meeting. So we would go into more detail in that. So do you want to come in with your question now? Yeah, please do.
That's good to know about September's meeting. Quick question on Operation Snap, which is mentioned in there, uses training, but my understanding is that it can also, the footage provided by cyclists can also be used by the police. Is that right? I know a few cyclists who are quite zealous users of that, and I think sometimes their experience is that they send it into the police but don't necessarily hear back, or so I wondered if you know a bit more about how that's used, and also whether it has any use, just your thoughts read on whether it has any use to us in terms of even just the number of incidents reported on Operation Snap, using that as an indicator for where there might be dangerous driving.
Chair, perhaps if I come in there. So I'm Gary Bartlett, I'm Chief Officer for Highways and Transportation. Yes, footage from dash cams, cameras that cyclists wear can be uploaded into the system now, into the police operations, and that's actively encouraged. At a recent meeting, a police colleague was outlining the sort of percentage success rate in terms of pursuing cases where that had been provided, that information had been provided. And it was quite high. I think from memory, I think it was about 70%. So obviously, I don't know how many, what the absolute volume of submissions have been made, and whether that was 70% of all of them or just the ones that they had pursued. But perhaps we can pick that up, Chair, in the September meeting. I'm sure a police representative will be at that meeting and be part of putting the report together. And I can certainly feed that back into the system after that question today, if that's helpful.
Thank you very much, Gary. I did remember in the brief, I did ask as well, in terms of demographics per ward, the number of incidences that you have. I'm not sure, have you got that information today, or I'm happy for you to. Oh, that's your question. Oh, I'm sorry.
I haven't got it to hand today, but we certainly will provide it as part of the September report.
Okay, thank you. And that was also Councillor Hamilton's question in her heart, but I've said it for her. Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, so just very quickly come in again as well. Also thinking about September, there's quite a bit about the new camera rules about deploying cameras. It'd be really interesting to look in more depth about that and the impact that's had. And also in particular, something I'm interested in is if putting cameras in is an effective intervention, as well as other interventions like lowering speed limit or what have you. What are the barriers to us doing more of that? I mean, I'm assuming funding is a huge one. And for example, Active Travel England, are they willing to fund more of that kind of thing, or is that not the sort of thing they're interested in funding? And also, are there legal barriers? And I just think that would be useful to look at in more detail in September. And also the kind of, this KPI is so important for killed or seriously injured. But we also know that when residents have fears about a road, maybe more from slight collisions or near misses, they will stop walking and cycling in that area. So it has a kind of chilling effect as well. So that indicator doesn't give a full picture of how dangerous a road is, because the danger obviously just puts people off as well. So whether those kind of, that less serious KPI can also be used to justify camera interventions, or if not, what are the barriers to that? But not really looking for a full discussion on that now, more just to say I think that would be something useful to look at in September as well.
Thank you for the questions. Yeah, I'm certainly not going to cover all that now, but just a couple of points, if I may. The last point is really interesting in terms of damage only accidents or collisions. We use the information that the police record because there is some level of rigor and robustness around it. And for every recorded collision, in some places, there might be 10 damage only. In some locations, there might be hundreds in some very busy urban environments. And it's how you collate that information data statistically soundly is a problem. But nevertheless, the point I wanted to make is Martin made reference to Vision Zero, and that is changing our whole approach to road safety, because in the past, it was a matter of, right, well, where have the collisions occurred historically, and what can we do to have solved those and put in a junction improvement or whatever. What Vision Zero is about is probably bringing it all forward, the review, and taking into account lots of data and intelligence that's out there from members, from residents, from the police, and trying to stop these collisions occurring in the first place. So that's a massive shift. Doesn't mean we will still do those reactive schemes, but we've got to move into this sort of front end approach as well. On the camera side, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I just pay credit here to my team and the police who've worked very closely together to bring in the new system around safety cameras, because we were waiting for a DFT review on this to take place. That's still ongoing, and I think the fear is that would be ongoing for quite a while longer for various reasons. I'm not being overly critical, but it's just a fact. But because of the good work that my colleagues in traffic engineering have done and transportation and with the police, we've been able to bring this new flexible and more adaptable approach forward in West Yorkshire that will see more deployment of mobile and fixed cameras, but also near Horsforth in the very near future, the first average speed camera system in West Yorkshire, which we are hoping will have a real benefit in terms of road safety. But there are lots of questions there. We'll try and cover them off in the September meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Hayden.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, Gary's covered it all. I just want to say how incredibly proud I am of the Vision Zero approach and of Gary, Gillian, and all the rest of the team who worked so hard on bringing this to fruition and leading on it in West Yorkshire. So that graph should be at 0 in 2040, and that's what we're aiming for. I want it far before that. There should be nobody killed or seriously injured on our roads. And the camera strategy, which is a brilliant piece of work, brought forward by, I have to say, one of our officers really taking the, I think he regretted it, but it's a brilliant piece of work, and it's going to make a real and tangible difference to especially speeding, which is a real blight in our communities. And that brings me on to the very essence of Vision Zero. It's about behaviour change. We can make all the highways interventions in the world, but if people speed, if they take risks, if they're not concentrating, then people will be killed and seriously injured. And that's what we have to get to the core of. And that's what Vision Zero is the core of. It's not a car that causes an accident. It's a person driving that car. It's a person that is responsible in whatever way, shape or form, is responsible for that. It's not an accident. It's a collision. It's an incident. An accident implies that something has happened that somebody wasn't responsible for. We're all responsible when we get behind the wheel of a car or any vehicle. And to go to your first point about Operation Snap, the meeting that Gary was referring to, it's absolutely fascinating, because I think it was a launch, actually, wasn't Gary, that the police showed actual footage that had been sent in, and it's absolutely brilliant. And but the police will not always, in fact, very rarely, feed back to those who actually upload. That's the case, and it's very frustrating that when you report something in, and we have it in all spheres of our work and life, really, that you won't necessarily know what happens with that information, and that's just a frustration. But that's not to say that it's not being used. It is being used, and the statistics are good, and we'll hear more about that in September. But please do encourage people to keep uploading it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hayden. Your words on it's all about the vision in terms of behavioural change, that resonates very well, and I'm really looking forward to our September's meeting to talk more about the vision on that. We've got about 4 members wanting to ask Gary questions. So I will start with, I'll take them in twos, Councillor Buckley and then Councillor Hamilton, and then Councillor, is it yourself, Giovanni, and then Councillor Aldous. That's 4 of you. And you, right, you'll be the 5th. Okay, right, so we'll start with Councillor Buckley.
I just wanted to ask about the average speed camera, because I don't know how this works. If it's on a road with a limit of, say, 70 miles an hour, speed limit of 70, and is it measured over a given section, a mile or half a mile or something like that? And if the man or the woman gets up to 80 and then slows down to 50, is the average speed under the limit? How does it work?
Yeah, I think it's as you outline it, really. It's an average speed camera over a set distance. So as you pass the first camera, you'll be clocked. And then as you go through the terminal point, you'll be clocked and the average speed will be determined. They have in the past tend to be used on motorways and dual carriageways where there are limited turnoffs for obvious reasons, because you could end up going through the first camera at 100 and then take the first turn off and not be caught. We will be supplementing some of our systems with fixed cameras, so that you might find a fixed camera within an average speed camera system, because we do know people drive very irrationally. I probably could use other adjectives, but I won't. So the basis of using average speed camera is it's another tool in our armory to try and just change the behavior. Ultimately, we don't want to catch anybody. We don't want to catch anybody who's speeding, who's drink driving, drug driving. We want people, as Councillor Hayden has rightly pointed out, to really think about what they're doing on the public highway, be they pedestrians, cyclists, bus users, drivers. We all have to take responsibility. It is not down to the Highways and Transportation Service of Leeds City Council to resolve all these ills. We will certainly play our part, and we're very passionate about this agenda. But this is a societal issue, and everybody, every family, every resident, every business in Leeds needs to own Vision Zero, and that will be the path that we will tread over the next 10, 15 years. And anything that members can do to spread the word be gratefully received.
Some of my questions have been answered already. So I'll just ask, because I had it written down here, with regards to when we request about reducing the speed limit on certain roads. For example, in my ward, one section is 40 and the next section is 20, you know, so, and the residents are always asking about why can't the council reduce the speed limit all the way, and what's that all about? So going forward for our next meeting, can I have some answers with regards to the reduction in speed? Why some roads are 40 or then 30 and then 20? And the next question, obviously the chairs ask that one. When we ask about reducing speed, obviously that's take a while to come back. We also ask about crossings in certain areas, and they take forever to come in. So we concentrate a lot on the city centre. The city centre to me is quite safe for crossing, etc. But then when it comes into our wards, when we're asking for extra crossings and reducing speed limit, I would like us to concentrate on our wards. But I won't expect any answers to those until then. And then with regards to people being seriously injured or killed, are they mostly just, are they the bikes, are they just walking, you know, etc., and where those hotspots are?
Thank you very much, Councillor Hamilton. So some of those, some of the answers are meant to come back in September, but I'll take a few more and then you can answer them together. So who was next, Councillor Gavani?
Yeah, some of the similar points that Councillor Hamilton just made. You know, where are these accidents happening? What sorts of roads are they on? Which I think is a very useful breakdown of it all. Again, reduction in speed limits. I've had similar queries as people who were on here last year know. You mentioned the average speed cameras, and I had the same query as you, Councillor Buckley, last year when they were first mentioned. And because coming from, say, Dawson's Corner to Horsforth Roundabout, you've got a roundabout in the middle. So what lengths are the speed cameras going to work along? And was told they will be between the roundabouts. So that actually will catch most of the drivers. And I'm glad to hear as well that there may well be spot cameras in there as well. So yeah, a bit more detail on where the accidents are happening, a bit more detail on the causes of the accidents. Is it speed, or is it drunk driving, drug driving, just reckless, careless driving? That'd be quite useful. But again, we can have some of that detail at the next meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Gavani. So that's still, no, Gary, you don't need to reply now because that's still down to the data that we have requested, where, what, and specifics. Councillor Alderson, and then Councillor Foster, and then Councillor Hatbrook, and then we'll move on to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from Councillor Hayden and Gary's points around educating road users, just wondered what work is going into, beg your pardon, what work is Vision Zero doing alongside West Yorkshire Police to tackle what we've come to know as the balaclava bikers, which are moving around the city, terrorising people, and not only a threat to the general public, but also themselves? And second question, slightly change of topic, the KSI figures, do you know how many of these incidents happened on rural roads? And I understand there's a rural speed review due to take place or possibly taking place in the city. I just wondered if Gary can update us on that and how that may feed into the Vision Zero. Thank you.
Sorry, just Becky would like to say something on your question, if that's all right, and not Gary. Yeah, thanks.
It was just to note that on the antisocial behaviour linked to motor vehicles, that falls within the remit of the Environment, Housing and Communities Board, and they're picking it up under their antisocial remit. But I can share that information with you so you can be cited on that.
Absolutely. It was just a question more as a follow-up around the educating road users, which these bikers seem to be, you know, not really following the rules. Thank you. But the other question around the rural speed review still stands. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, some of them are very naughty.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Foster and then Councillor Hatbrook.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I just wondered if there was correlation between a few things really. One was the dire state of public transport connections for the communities, the outer communities. That's forcing additional people into the motor vehicles to access the city and areas across the city. And that combined with the amount of roadworks that we've got going on at the moment. I mean, I live in outer South Leeds at the moment, and I have to now circumnavigate the city to find a re-entry point to be able to get access. So I'm conscious there'll be a lot of people using different networks to those they've used for many years. So I'm just wondering if that may point to why we seem to have seen a bit of an up spike after the COVID issue.
Anecdotally, I think the standard of driving post the lockdowns has not been good, and I think anybody that uses the roads, certainly it was very noticeable in the first few months after we came out of the lockdown about the speed, and it did feel, and I think we all felt it. It was quite a shock to be back in the car and driving, and some some of the things that were witnessed on the highway network were not good at all. So whilst the strikes that have been happening on public transport and some of the issues that public transport have had in recent months have not helped, I think that there are no robust statistical evidence one way or the other, but anecdotally, certainly the industry talks about those lockdowns and the bad driving that's been experienced since has a lot to play. One of the things that hasn't come out in the conversation so far is and it's covered in the report, is the crash system, how the police record the number of recorded collisions these days, and that's resulted in an uplift in the statistics. And so I'm not saying it's responsible for all of it, but it's certainly something that is seen across the country in all highway authorities, where KSIs have all increased because of the introduction of this new way of recording collisions. And again, that's something perhaps we can get into in the September meeting. Can I just pick up on a couple of other points? The rural speed review, that's ongoing. It is certainly the case that we are looking about trialing perhaps some lower speed limits on some of our rural roads to tackle some of the behaviours that we see on our rural roads. Single vehicles travelling at very high speed. Whether lowering the speed limit will impact those sorts of drivers is another thing, but that comes back down to this behavioural change. And perhaps finally, without going into too much detail, in the industry, road safety industry, we do talk about the fatal fives, which relate to excessive speeding. These are the causation factors that are responsible predominantly for the collisions and drive the activity that we want to change. So excessive speed, drink and drug driving, distracted driving, which is like using a mobile phone, and not wearing a seatbelt. I hope I've covered 5 there. Careless driving, drink and drug, seatbelt, excessive speed, distracted driving.
That's it. Well done.
Drink and drug, I'm
Okay.
combining.
Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Hayden.
Just on a couple of points about public transport, which we'll come on to in the last KSI, so I don't want to spend too long, but whether that makes people get into their cars more, I've not seen every evidence of that. You know, poor public transport, it probably does anecdotally, but that's not to say that it will result in more, because those people getting into their cars have a responsibility to drive safely. And if you are driving through the city centre, the roadworks, which are there to design to make it safer for pedestrians and for cyclists, and so that these numbers, because going back to a question that Councillor Hamilton asked about, who is it that is, obviously the statistics will be there in September, but a high percentage of people who are killed and seriously injured are cyclists, are pedestrians. So the more safe we make the roads for them, the less people will be driving, and therefore there will be less, and they will be safer. So it's all part of our Vision Zero, that the less people driving, the more people who are safe to walk and cycle, the less killed and seriously injured. So, and if people are in congestion, then they're more likely to have those damage collisions rather than the much more serious or fatal ones. And we are lucky in Leeds that we have a 1970s motorway going round the edge. And yes, it's different to what we used to do, but we used to drive up and down Briggate as well. So it's about making that cultural change, that if you're wanting to get from one part of the city to the other, you don't have to go through the city centre. 30% of the journeys through city square were going from one part of the city to another, not into the city centre, not accessing the city centre. They were going from one part of the city centre to the other. Use the inner ring road, and it'd be much better for everyone, especially the people shopping and in the leisure activities of City Square. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Councillor Cooper.
I wonder if I could just give some additional information, as it's been raised about the antisocial behaviour of some of the riders of motorcycles and so on. And we've got a public space protection order coming into force on the 3rd of July, which aims at changing behaviour of antisocial use of any vehicle. So that's for motorbikes and e-scooters, e-bikes, all, cars, all of that. So alongside the work on Vision Zero about reducing speed and reducing harm and death, is the work around antisocial behaviour. So even off-road, or not on the public highway, in other areas as well, to deal with the which includes noise from cars, car meets and so on like that, playing loud music. Lots of things are covered by it. And I know that it's reported into the Housing and Community Scrutiny Board that Becky talked about earlier, but I just wanted to raise awareness with scrutiny members here this morning that comes into force on the 3rd of July. So hopefully that will, in addition to the work going on around reducing speed, will also help in some of the situations that members have raised this morning.
That's great, Councillor Cooper. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Hatbrook, I'm hoping that all your questions have been answered. You still got a question?
Yeah. We've mentioned average speed cameras. Personally, I'm a huge advocate of them because I know that they work. you travel on the A66 between Scotch Corner and Penrith, everybody speeds. The one spot where nobody speeds is the bit as you get about near where the Lama Cafe used to be, and everybody slows down and sticks by the speed limit. Similar on the M621 around Leeds, 40-mile-an-hour speed limit in there, everybody sticks to it because they know you go in, you get logged, you go out, and if you've averaged over 40, you've got a ticket. They work. The question I'd like to ask, and it's probably not going to be answered here, and more for time and more for, is I know there are many what I'll call rat runs and not major arterial roads like the one at Stanningley, which is getting speed cameras, but there are many roads where speeding is a huge problem. And although not entirely point-to-point driving, is substantially point-to-point driving, people using, you know, for example, where I live, Wood Lane through Rothwell, and the other sort of key, what I would class as major residential roads, which see speeding. I'd like to know whether there can be plans in the future once this pilot's been proven to be successful, which I'm sure and hope it will be, because speed, you know, there are many factors that contribute to an accident, but when an accident happens, the one thing that determines how serious it is more than anything else is the amount of speed involved, and the speed goes up, the likelihood for death, particularly of cyclists and pedestrians, goes up exponentially as speed increases. So I'd like to see these, you know, this technology and approach used in many more situations, and I like the idea that it's coupled with fixed cameras, so you can, as Councillor Buckley said, you know, do a kind of blat of the accelerator between the cameras and still get away with it.
Sorry, Gary. Yeah, you need a stretch of road for the average speed cameras, and that's the length of the length between the average has been brought down by the brilliant work of Leeds Highways Authority, because that's why we couldn't have it on the ring road before, because the space needed between one camera and the next was too long for. So that was all part of the review that one of our officers did. So that wouldn't work, but Gary mentioned these mobile cameras, which will be in vehicles and the police will be able to deploy. So say you had a hotspot in your ward, you would approach us, the police, and say, can we have some intervention? And they would be able to deploy. No, they're not average, because you need a certain quite substantial length of road to do the average. But these will be more mobile ones. So saying you can get the guns, or the police can use the guns, these will be proper cameras that will be linked in vehicles that the police will be able to deploy into where we think it needs to be done. And therefore it can be, because you do need a long road to do the average, do the average thing. They are better than fixed speed cameras, because we often get asked, because Councillor Buckley is quite right, with a fixed camera, people slow down for the camera and then speed up.
No, I think all I would add is that there's some good news here in terms of the new approach will enable more mobile and more fixed sites to be established, which is what members were telling us in the correspondence, the emails we get, because before the criteria were very strict and we were saying no to a lot of this, or the West Yorkshire Safety Camera Partnership, ultimately responsible, was. We've now have this more flexible and adaptable policy that will allow us to hopefully collectively respond positively to these concerns, because they are widespread across the city in residential areas, but we're not going to see fixed cameras on every corner for obvious reasons. And it comes back time and time again to this change in behaviour that we've got to sort of supplement all these engineering measures that we'll be deploying, hopefully as flexibly and as adaptably as we can.
Thank you very much, Gary. Sorry, Councillor Hartbrook, I'll have to bring that performance indicator to a wrap because of time. Could I also ask, so for number 11, which is about the satisfaction with a range of transport services. Now, we are going to have our bus providers who would be attending one of our scrutiny sessions later in the municipal year. and we have the Connecting Leeds Transport Strategy for July. So could I ask that we keep comments and questions to July so that we could go on to city centre footfall as the last item, because we are really running out of time and I do not want to go beyond 1 p.m. Is that okay with board members?
Sorry,
Except you've got anything for the transport, the KPI on transport, except if you've got something really concerning that you would like to add.
So when did you say we're going to discuss?
July. We've got Connecting Leeds Transport Strategy in our July's meeting on the agenda. Do you have a question that you would like to ask? If you have something pressing,
an observation. Yeah, because I would have thought this was probably one of the most important items on this agenda for me.
It is. If you do, you have. That's why I asked the question. Do you have something?
But I also know. Is there anybody here from WICA at the meeting?
Do we?
So
there will be in July.
Okay.
Yes. So that's what I'm saying. Let's keep it to July, and then we have good timing to discuss that in more detail than running through it now. All right. Okay, thank you very much. Right, city centre footfall, and I would also like to say, if we, Eve, is it yourself, Martin, giving us a quick brief on this one? I do know in our September as well, we have an agenda on inclusive growth. So we would be discussing this as well in more detail in our September's meeting. So over to you on that one, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So in the papers, you've got the city centre footfall recorded up to March 2023, which shows that it was down 16.7% compared with March 2019, so a pre-pandemic comparison. But that is up 2.4% compared with March 2022. So whilst there's a pandemic impact, we still appear to be recovering, and weekend footfall is down by only 3% on pre-pandemic levels. I've got the data for June, takes us up to June this year, the beginning of June, where it's around 9% up on the same period in 2022. So that recovery appears to be strengthening, albeit we are still down against the 2019 figures. And that's broadly average with core cities. And whilst we're up 9%, the UK average is 7%.
Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Buckley.
This is typical, isn't it, of a lockdown legacy? Because here we have on these figures 16% down since 2019. And one of the things that drives footfall is people being physically working in the city. So as one of the biggest, if not the biggest employer in the city, what are we doing? What steps are we taking to have our employees working in the city and not working from home?
All right. I mean, I can comment on behalf of the directorate, but I can't give a response on behalf of the whole authority. I don't.
Councillor Cooper, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just in the sense of trying to be helpful here, there's Resources and Strategy Board look into all the detail in terms of the HR responsibility within the Resources Directorate, which Martin doesn't is not kind of responsible for that area at all. So can I suggest to Councillor Buckley that he passes it through to that board for some response?
Well, I'm a little bit disappointed, Chairman, because this is specifically an item on the agenda, and I've just been given no answer whatsoever. And it just seems to me one of the most important questions of the time, that here we are allowing people to work from home and ignoring the impact on footfall in the city.
Councillor Hayden and then Councillor Pryor.
sorry, because Councillor Pryor will probably be much better at this than me, but if can I take us back, this is a not an agenda item, this is a KSI. If we take back to when we were talking about planning and recruitment and retention, because you wanted us to pay more than the private sector, and we can't, one of the things that the private sector is offering is flexible working, and more companies I was hearing in London moving out of Canary Wharf into by St Paul's because they need smaller offices because they're people, they're highly trained, experienced people want that flexibility of working. They don't want to come into an office, and they will go elsewhere and work for other people who will give them that flexibility of working from home. So if we start forcing people, and I don't think it's morally right either, to start forcing people to work in the city centre. There's also the climate emergency, and if people are travelling 100% of the time into the city centre, we've just been talking about Vision Zero, so we're going to have more people travelling, which would affect those statistics. We saw how it went down in the pandemic, people killed and seriously injured when less people are driving. So if there's a whole host of things, but if you don't come into the office 1 day a week, that's 20% cut in your emissions, in your carbon emissions. So there's a whole host of reasons why it's not necessarily a bad thing that less people are coming into the city centre. The patterns have changed, so they're not coming in during the week as much, but more people are coming in at the weekend. And the reasons why people come into it might not be for shopping, but that our leisure and cultural offer is hugely popular, and people are coming in their hundreds of thousands. But I'll let Councillor Pryor, because he'll.
Yeah, I was initially going to make exactly the same point as Councillor Hayden, that we discussed earlier in this board about the importance of retention in recruitment, and actually offering that flexibility around work is vital to that, to not lose employees to the private sector. There is a lot of data beneath that top line as well when we look at behavioural changes. So for example, Monday is a day which is significantly down pretty much every week. A lot of the other days of the week are closer to 2019, sometimes 1 or 2% below, sometimes a little above, but it is Monday which is consistently down. What we have actually seen is a shift to people coming in over the weekend. So I'm literally looking at the data for last weekend. Saturday was up 10.3% on 2019. Sunday up 18.6%. And I think this shows a shift in why people come into city centres. Yes, we're seeing fewer people in the week because they have more flexible working, they're working from home, but we're seeing more people come in at the weekend, and that's linked to using the city centre for leisure and entertainment, and it does show, it justifies we as a council supporting a lot of cultural activity in the city. If we want to boost the economy, that cultural activity is linked to the economy so tightly that there's a real justification in that. It does mean that the economy will shift. It will mean that those places perhaps selling lunch to office workers in the week are going to find it more difficult. You're absolutely right that there has been a shift in the economy since COVID, undoubtedly. But if we want to, keep workers retained within the council, making our employment significantly less flexible would not be the way to go about that at all. It's probably also worth mentioning, it's not in this report as well, but we are also seeing an increase in footfall at Kirkgate Market, which I think is vitally important. From memory, I think we've gone from, I think in March and April, it went from 460,000 people attending the market to 480,000. We're just finishing a huge amount of renovation works in the market, so getting even more stalls in. So hopefully, I'm very keen that we break that 500,000 visitors a month to Kirkgate Market very soon, and I'm pretty confident we will, to be honest. And I think it just shows the strength of what we have going on in our city centre. As Martin said in the opening, while there is still recovery to go, we are actually recovering faster than a lot of comparable areas.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Pryor. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to come back on Councillor Buckley's question and comments that he made following my response. My response was to save this board getting into the remit of another board's policy area, which is HR policy that sits with a different board. Can I just clarify that Councillor Buckley's comments, I did not say that we weren't doing anything to enable our employees to come back and work in the office. That is not the case at all. And I would just like to point out that we are a large employer. We have a lot of employees, most of whom do not work in the city centre, that they are based throughout the city. And the suburbs, and not most of them are based in the city centre at all. There are plans in place that are being undertaken by the HR department around people working in a flexible way, both in office-based workers in the office and working from home as well. But I would just point out that most of our staff are not office-based, so they worked on the front line throughout COVID and never did work from home. Most of them are still continuing to do that, and our office-based staff are coming in a proportion of the time into the office as well as working from home as well. But I would like just to make sure that that point is clarified, both for members and for the press that are sitting behind here.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper, for that clarification, and that's fully noted. So thank you, Councillor Hamilton and then Hapbrook.
Right. My question with regarding the footfall, is it having any detrimental effect on the businesses within the city?
I'll take two questions at a time. Councillor Hapbrook, please.
Sorry, I know.
Yeah, no, I should answer both. I just need to take two questions at the same time.
Yes, no, I was just going on to say that I asked about the businesses. Is you let me.
Very aware of time. I was going to comment around how hybrid working, I think, is something to be lauded, and it's one of the few good things that's come out of COVID, is that it's accelerated the trend that was already happening to give people more flexibility and more creative ways of working. However, there is a wider impact in terms of it shifts how we view our city, in that it shifts our city from where people do come into the centre to do their place of work to people where people work more from home, and it emphasises the need more for good quality facilities in local community areas, you know, such as Rothwell, such as Crossgate, such as Pudsey, such as Morley. And I'd like to understand what, as a city, we're doing to, if anything, to, rather than historically, which has put a lot of effort and resources into the centre, to do more at a local and community level.
So I'll come in quickly, Chair, and maybe this is something you might want to consider to take more evidence on at some later point. So some members of Scrutiny will recall that one of the pieces of economic policy work we did after COVID was to look specifically at the future of our city centre and local centres, which included quite extensive research. That pointed to the fact that it was still when lockdowns were being applied, and it pointed to the fact that people wanted to come back into the city centre primarily to access culture and to have shared experiences. And then secondly, to access the retail offer, for example, that we have in the city centre. There was also a lot of information in that report about what people might want to see locally, including, you know, options to potentially have shared workspaces where they might not have been before. We're looking in the updated inclusive growth strategy to make sure that we give prominence to both of those priorities as reported in that report. And that's obviously coming through Executive Board in September. So perhaps we might be able to return to it. But the question about businesses and impact on businesses. The primary impact was more in 2021 and early part of 2022 when restrictions were still in place and people were not returning to the office. Anecdotally and through some information we received from partners in the city, whilst footfall is down, basket spend is up for retailers. So it doesn't always equate necessarily to reduced footfall, reduced spend, and particularly when you have higher footfall levels at weekends, when people are choosing to come into the city centre to spend on, in particular areas. It does impact some businesses who might have been reliant on the office worker that popped in to buy an item at lunchtime. And you do see some shift in the city centre. Undoubtedly, there's been shifts in certain brands moving out of the city centre, other brands coming in and seeing the opportunity in Leeds, because we are lucky that we have fantastic infrastructure that the council supported being developed in the past decade. But then we also have great, really forward-looking managers of Trinity Leeds and other parts of the city who really think about how they can animate those centres. And Trinity Leeds, for example, through the land securities, have partnered with Leeds 2023, and they've done some incredible things in both of their centres with culture, which has brought more people in. So there's a kind of interrelationship between the two. But very happy, Chair, to kind of go into more detail about this with members of Scrutiny at the right time.
Thank you very much. That'll be very helpful, because we do have some of the links with what you're discussing, and with inclusive growth as well, which needs to come back in September. So we are more than happy for you to also contact the localities team as well, and then bring that back onto the agenda in September. I am so sorry. I'm not. Councillor Pryor, do you really want to say something?
It was just very, very brief on Councillor Hamilton's point. Like, yes, businesses, fewer people in the area does mean fewer people spending money, but also it's important to note that that's not the only difficulty they're going through now. Huge issues with inflation, and not just, hitting individuals and individuals' spending power. So it means when people are in the city centre, they've got less disposable income because they're spending it all on having to spend an extra 300 quid a month on their mortgage or wherever they're at. But also those inflationary costs are also hitting the businesses themselves, their own energy costs, and their own, all the on costs there. So yes, while footfall is a factor, it's not the only factor in why a lot of businesses will be struggling at the moment.
Absolutely, Councillor Pryor. Thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of this agenda item. Please, could I ask executive members and officers to please just wait behind for our sources of work item. She will not be long, so we are kind of done really. So thank you all so much for all your contributions today. Over to you, Becky.
The next item on the agenda is sources of work. This is a standard item at the start of the municipal year. We just ask members to consider whether there are additional priorities that you want to build into your work programme for 23-24. One issue that I've been asked to highlight is Councillor Hayden's request of Councillor Marshall-Katung that the board considers a 6-month review of the recent changes to the planning portal. I don't know if Councillor Hayden wants to come in and just say a few words about that.
Thank you, Becky. Yes, it's a 6-month trial, so I'd be very grateful if this scrutiny board could assess the pros and cons and what's happened and people's comments at the end of that 6-month trial. Thank you.
I'll take that as read if there's no objections from board members, and we'll feed that into the work programme.
The 6 months trial, when will that be? Where will it be on the agenda? Which 6 months? Next year?
Yeah, which Christmas? It started, so I say October would probably be a good time. Yeah.
Don't know, Chair, if you want to invite members to set out any particular issues they want to build into the work programme.
Members? They're ready to go home. Okay.
Pick them up outside.
Yeah, we can always pick that up outside of this meeting. So members, just feel free to pop an email through or give us a call if there's anything else you would like to add to our work for this municipal year.
And if members could just note the existing schedule, I will assume that we're working on the basis of that unless I'm given another indication from the board.
Thank you very much. And our next meeting is on the 19th of July at 10:30 a.m. So pre-meeting will be 10:15 and not 10 a.m. as agreed at our pre-meeting. So thank you all so much for coming. For those celebrating Eid, you can go back to your families now and have a lovely celebration, and see you all in July. Take care. Thank you.